This is video lecture 8. Today we are going to cover the Eastern Indians' New World. 3 parts today, the Puritans and the Pequots. We are going to cover Metacom's War, and finally the destructive impact of the fur trade. So let's begin. Even before they began their trek across the Atlantic, European settlers conceived of the New World as a wilderness, largely devoid of any inhabitants. They were wrong, of course, but the indigenous inhabitants of the Chesapeake and the New England colonies made much less intensive use of the land than did the Europeans. A fact attributed by the Europeans to the Indians' lack of civilization. Having marginalized the natives in their minds, the settlers proceeded to marginalize the natives in fact, and they swamped the land with ever-growing numbers of people. Natives occasionally fought back, most fiercely in the case of Opechagano's War on the Virginia colony in 1622, and Metacom's War on the New Englanders in 1675 through 76. But such resistance invariably ended in failure and brutal suppressions by Europeans. Most native peoples lived initially beyond direct contact with Europeans, but few escaped the consequences of their arrival. European diseases devastated Indian peoples, of course, and forced many to abandon their traditional communities and join other tribes. As Indians entered into the fur trade with Europeans, game became depleted, and warfare between tribes themselves became more common. And this fundamentally altered the Indian way of life. Finally, as Europeans penetrated into the interior, those natives who did not flee westward found themselves living among strangers in a land that was no longer their own, one in which they increasingly were forced to follow these alien rules. So, the Eastern Indians' New World today. Let's begin with that first section, Puritans and Pequots. Seeing themselves as God's chosen people, the Puritans justified taking Indian lands on religious grounds. In 1636, Pequot warriors attacked English farmers who had intruded on their lands. In retaliation, Puritan militiamen and their Indian allies massacred about 500 Pequots. English Puritans viewed the Indians as savages, who did not deserve civilized treatment. To them, Native Americans were not genetically inferior. Sin, or Satan rather than race, accounted for their degenerate condition. In their efforts to Christianize the Indians, the Puritans created praying towns that supervised the Indian population. On to the next section then, Metacom's War of 1675 and 76. By the 1670s, there were 3 times as many whites as Indians in New England. Whites numbered about 55,000, while Indians numbered about 16,000. Seeking to stop the European advance, the Wampanoag leader Metacom forged a military alliance with the Narragansetts and the Nipmucks in 1675. The group attacked white settlements throughout New England, and the fighting continued until Metacom's death in 1676. Losses were high on both sides, but the Indians' losses were worse. 25% of the already diminished Indian population died from war or disease. Many of the surviving Algonquin people migrated further into the New England backcountry, where they intermarried with other Algonquin tribes who were tied to the French, who became their ally in future attacks against the English. So that was Metacom's War. Let's go to our final section today, which is the destructive impact of the fur trade. As English settlers continued to advance inland, the Indians who lived near the Appalachian Mountains and in the forested areas beyond remained independent. The fur trade impacted Indians who lived great distances from European settlements. Indians willingly participated in this fur trade and avoided European traders who exploited them, though they did not always secure the highest price for their furs simply because they lacked knowledge of the European fur prices and the European markets. Indian communities ultimately could not stop the impact of these European traders, settlers, and European diseases on their societies. European goods quickly penetrated Indian societies, which reduced native economic and religious independence. The result of the wars and involvement in the fur trade was that the character of Indian society throughout the eastern woodland region was permanently altered. Disease, sickness from liquor, and neglected artisan skills were the fur trade's legacy. When French missionaries won converts among the Huron and the Iroquois, they divided these Indian communities into hostile religious factions. Constant warfare then shifted tribal power from cautious Indian elders to headstrong young warriors, and the position and status of women changed in complex and contradictory ways. The fur trade profoundly altered the natural environment by severely depleting the animal population and by changing habitats. Okay, this does conclude video lecture number 8. Please address the review questions at the bottom and move on to the reading.